Welcome everyone. This is Condo Co-ops and HOAs. Oh my. So we're going to be covering the statutory and contractual best practices from listing to close. Now, my name is Michelle Martinez, owner and founder of Hometown TCs. I started my career way back in 1995 when contracts were literally 2 sheets of paper and a carbon copy. So yes, I have dated myself. But at the end of the day, through my career in real estate, or I should say as a real estate support professional, I have processed over 10,000 residential and commercial transactions. And my goal for the next hour or time that we are together is to arm you with the knowledge you need to get these transactions sold. Now, to understand associations, you need to know how they are developed. This will lay the foundation to understand the reasoning for the statutory and contractual requirements that we see from day to day. So without further ado, we're just going to get right into the material. And at the end, I'm going to share some best practices, tips and tricks so that you can get these transactions through the pipeline as quickly as possible and as unscathed as possible. We may run into some amazing current events that I've noticed lately. And I love to use these as a way to highlight that, hey, people are going to try. This is real estate is human, but we always have something to fall back on. And I hope that you feel empowered with the information that you received today. So there is some confusion about the differences between a condominium, a cooperative, a homeowners association. Residents of these communities interchangeably call them homeowners, property owners to describe themselves. But the development of these particular association types really give you the key as to what is the reality of each type. So I preface this with saying that a condominium is literally established right from the gate. And what they do is they record a declaration of condominium in which the community as a whole owns certain aspects, the amenities, the building, and they share this expense. However, each of the condo units, the owners owned a part of that parcel, and that is the airspace within their walls, right? So anything within the walls is theirs. Outside of those walls, it's community property. It's the community as a whole. So when we have situations, let's say for like a leak or on the property or a, so usually I want to say it's kind of like a maintenance issue that usually you have something dripping from the unit upstairs. That is why they take some time to kind of figure out where is the location of this leak. Is it from the unit above, or is it coming from the roof and trickling down the walls and basically going through each and every one of these units? Once they're able to pinpoint where is this situation coming from, then they're going to be like, okay, the community is going to take care of this expense, or the unit above you or beside you is the one that needs to take care of the expense. So when you think of a condominium, think of it like this. I own my unit. I partially own the community aspects, the amenities, the walls, the services that are in there. We are all part ownership of that. When it comes to the cooperatives, it's a little bit different. The co-ops have their community, but they don't have it as a community. It's set up like a company. So a co-op, everyone has shares into this community, and they are given a proprietary lease to the unit. However, they don't own it. They just have shares into this company. So they receive a stock certificate, a proprietary lease, and basically it gives them rights within the community itself and the ability to live into the designated unit. But the company as a whole owns everything within that co-op. In a homeowners association, which is parcel owners, you have everything within your perimeter, which is stated on your survey, that is yours. So These are lot and block owners. So lot and block owners, they're responsible for everything within their property, and then they own parts of the community, the amenities, and that is what is associated within the homeowners association. So to summarize, in a condominium, you own the airspace. In a co-op, you own a stock and a proprietary lease to live in the unit, but everything is wholly owned by the company itself. In an HOA, you own the lot and block, and then you share the sidewalk, the amenities, the tennis court, everything that is communally owned. Everybody owns a little bit of that. So those are the key differences between each type of governing type when it comes to the property. When it comes to the development of it, it's just the way that it was recorded into the county records. So it's either you own space, you own shares, or you own the lot and block. The most important thing to remember when you're dealing with an association, though, is that it's their club, their rules. They govern themselves. They're considered quasi-governmental. That doesn't mean that they can do whatever they want. It just means that they have united and created rules to established in their community that everyone must follow. So now that we know how it's been developed, knowing the development is going to give clarity in what the statutory and contractual requirements are. So we're just going to be diving right into the Florida statutes aspect of it, then going into municipal ordinances, which I will be focusing on Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, and then what the contractual writers say. So when it comes to the statutory aspects of the governing types, these are the ones that you need to be aware of. In condominiums, they are governed by Florida Statute 718, co-ops 719, HOAs 720. Now, the key differences after knowing how they are developed is understanding what is responsibility of whom when we are in the list to close process. So statutory wise, for a condominium, right off the bat, it informs everyone that as of Florida statutes, seller is responsible for providing governing documents and financials to buyer upon written request. This buyer right is unwaivable, and buyer has a right to void a contract if documents are not received. Buyer also has a 3 business day review right to rescind, period. Okay, so knowing that this is an unwaivable right, I have an important highlight of this. Back in 2015, there was a ton of REOs, and the banks would try to make this a responsibility of the buyer to get their own docs. Now, because they were trying to make this a responsibility of the buyer instead of them as the seller, doesn't matter how you took title, this property is in Florida and it's still going to be governed by the almighty rule of the land. The seller is responsible in providing these documents. So even though buyer signed, yeah, I'll make myself responsible, you can't supersede what is on Florida statutes. So the buyer always had a right to tell the seller, hey, upon my request, you have to get me these documents. Go fetch. Okay. So with that said, it's still prevalent, not in foreclosures, but sometimes sellers will try to push back and make the buyer, especially in a condominium, make themselves responsible for purchasing documents. As per Florida statutes, it's a seller responsibility to provide those documents. And because of that, at the moment that the buyer requests them, the seller needs to provide them over to them. If the buyer does not get any of the documents or gets the full set of documents, the buyer has the right to cancel all the way until the point of the consummation of the contract, mainly closing. So the faster that we can get out of what I like to call the review period and get all of those documents in, the better. With co-ops, it's a little bit different. So because this is governed as a corporation, the seller is responsible for providing the governing documents to the buyer, but the buyer is not entitled to the actual financials of the community. It's a private company, and that company does not need to give its financials. That is basically the understanding when they wrote this law. Okay, so the buyer can ask for all documents except financials. Buyer also has a 3 business day review right to rescind period baked into the Florida statutes. With that said, always try to get out of that as quickly as possible. And we'll go into best practices on how to do that later on in the presentation. Now, for homeowners association, they differ tremendously from condo and co-op. In the homeowners association, buyer must receive the HOA disclosure summary prior to signing an offer. If the buyer does not receive that prior to signing the offer, buyer has the right to void contract at any point if they do not receive it. So even if you place an HOA disclosure in the summary is made part of the contract, the buyer has at that point 3 days to review. So always have that disclosure summary if you're the listing agent on your supplements, which we're going to go through that in best practices, but is incredibly important because in the statute it says the buyer should have that before submitting an offer. And that way you can show through chain of events that it was disclosed prior to signing the offer. One of the other differences from the other 2 governing types is that the seller, if cost is associated, seller is not required to provide governing documents to the buyer. So when condo and co-ops, seller is responsible at their own expense to provide these. At an HOA, seller is not responsible. They do not have to give any documents over to the buyer. The buyer wishes to make their own due diligence. They can do that during their inspection period, ask all the questions, get all the documents, pay for those documents if they want to. Now, municipalities. The municipalities, they get together and they create ordinances to basically smooth out the processes within their communities. What I tell everybody is if they receive enough complaints about a certain activity, then they'll make an ordinance associated with that everybody must abide to. So as you see here, when we're focusing on Tri-County, there are ordinances regarding fees and ordinances regarding application turnaround time. That is to show you what is important to them at this point, because that's all the complaints that they're receiving. And it makes sense. At the end of the day, there was a time where people took their sweet time to respond to applications, and fees were getting astronomical. But as you see here, there's some things that I want to highlight. Miami-Dade and Broward have application turnaround time at 45 days. Now, it doesn't say calendar and it doesn't say business. So even if the association says, hey, we'll respond back in 45 business days, they're in compliance of municipal ordinance. If they say calendar days, fantastic. The moment that they say 50 days, oh, wait, hold on. As per the municipality, you're supposed to return back a response within 45 days. So that's when you can kind of give a little pushback. But as long as they're within those 45 days, whether they interpret that as calendar or business, they are correct. In Palm Beach, they have a turnaround time of 30 days. Again, it does not reference whether it is business or calendar days. So as long as they're within that 30-day period, whether calendar or business, they are correct. Once they go after that, then you can say, well, reference the municipal ordinances that says that they need to provide a response earlier than that. One of the complaints that they were receiving a lot was fees. Fees were becoming incredibly rampant, and they passed an ordinance saying, hey, the max an association can charge for the application is $100. Now, caveat, because most associations are managed by property management companies, this does not apply to the property management company, only to the association. So when you see the association cost is $100, they are in compliance. The fees by the property manager are not governed by this. So if they charge an additional $150 for their background, for all their administrative expenses, they're not out of compliance. So I tell everyone, if this is a self-managed association, then they are in compliance as long as the fee does not pass $100 per applicant. However, when you have a property management firm that is either increasing their fees for background checks, for I don't know what fee, I really don't understand why it's costing so much money these days, or they tack on the lovely $200 rush fee, they are not out of compliance because this ordinance does not apply to them. It only applies to the association. Now the fun part, the contractual. Now, the contractual requirements I'll be referencing are the FAR bar contract. 99% of all contracts, especially in South Florida, are executed on a FAR bar rider. If you have questions on the additional types of contracts available, let's talk about it in length during our Q&A session. But in the contractual requirements for the association, in the condo rider, which is rider A, it says that seller has to initiate the approval process. What does that mean? The seller has to inform the association that they're selling their property, grab the screening application, sign any applicable areas, and provide that over to the buyer. Pretty straightforward. Initiate the approval process. Unfortunately, what happens is people say, hey, go get your own application, and maybe that application is wrong, is outdated, the association won't give it to them, and that is outside of what's written in the contract. As long as the seller has to initiate the approval process, and that's what it states in the contract, that's exactly what needs to happen. Seller needs to initiate that process for them. One of the important key caveats of the condo rider is that contract is terminated if approval is not received by deadline. So if we leave the contract rider as a blank, then the default is 5 days before closing, buyer will have approval. If buyer does not have approval 5 days before closing, that rider automatically terminates the contract and returns the deposit back to the buyer. Point blank, period. So what I suggest is making that either 0 day of closing or 1 day before closing. That way you are able to have a little bit more of a control. If you're not closing that day and the buyer didn't receive their approval that morning, let's go ahead and move the closing date, and at least you're moving everything with the closing date. 5 days before, and you're not monitoring this date specifically, your contract is kaput. And if the buyer decides, hey, you know what, I'm walking and I don't need to ask permission because it's rider terminated, they're right. And do people use it? Yes, they do. I've helped a lot of buyers get out of contracts just with that clause alone. So I'm letting you know, as a safeguard, keep an eye on that date, especially when you're on the seller side, so that it helps you in mitigating that when it comes through. One of the caveats is also seller is liable for full assessment if not disclosed. It happens more often than needed to that a special assessment is put on the meeting minutes, and now it has passed, and it's now on our estoppel that there is an assessment and no one was wiser of it. And unfortunately, seller cannot claim that they did not know because every meeting minute has to be delivered to the seller for review, or the owners for their review if they have any questions to call the board. Now, humans are humans, right? They're going to do what they do best. I just got a notice from the association. Let me put it in this drawer right here and I'll look at it later. Survey says that did not happen. So now we have to scramble at this point to kind of mitigate that issue. Always recommend getting at least 6 to 12 months of meeting minutes while you're in the listing process, or even if you're on the buyer side, request them if you can. That way, it's part of the contract. You get them and you can have a full overview of what is going on in this association before you get in. Now, with co-ops, they do not have an actual writer in the addenda. You have to write it in, and it's a co-op addendum, and it's separate from FARBAR. And again, no recent financials are provided for cooperatives. And another thing is that there's not a typical approval process. Given that this is governed as a corporation, things could get a little wonky. I've seen a lot of weird situations, to say the least, when it comes to these types of associations. So the more information that you have up front, the better, because this is going to help you in navigating the different aspects that come from a co-op. Now, co-ops are not incredibly popular in Miami-Dade County, but you will see a few in Broward County and a few in Palm Beach County. Like I told everyone, this is like the great migration as people come from up north and other areas and develop in our wonderful seaside towns. They're bringing what they know. And as they're bringing in these cooperatives, it's good to know how they're established, what rules they have, so that you can navigate them comfortably and mitigate any pitfalls throughout the way. With the homeowners associations, the seller initiates the approval process. Buyer has no deadline for application submission. And buyer has a right to terminate if approval is not received by deadline. So a little bit different than the condo writer, which is that it automatically terminates the contract. Buyer has a right to terminate if approval is not received by deadline in the HOA writer. So one of the key components that I tell most of my agents is this. The first part is that seller has to initiate the approval process. That is the contingency that is first. There is no application deadline written into the writer. The only thing on the buyer is to receive their approval on time. So the more information we have from the beginning, the better. That way they can work backwards from their deadline approval and make sure that they submit in time. And then we're going to get into a little bit of the best practices here, because this is going to help you in understanding how to navigate these condos, co-ops, and homeowners associations. Now, I'm going to talk from both perspectives, whether it's the buyer or the seller that you're walking with in this transaction. For the condos, I'm going to preface it this way. A buyer cannot disclose themselves. They have never lived in the community, or if they're investors and have a ton of units in the building, that's fine, but they don't own that unit and they don't know the responsibilities of that unit. So with that said, listing agents, have your seller complete the condominium rider at time of listing appointment. This is going to make sure that everything that they know is properly documented. And if there is an amendment, something passes, hey, keep your hand on the pulse. Make sure that anything that is happening in that association that you are well versed on. Just this last month, we had a situation where, of course, a special assessment was passed. the association was not allowing it to be conveyed with a new buyer. It had to be completely paid at time of closing in order to convey the unit. Of course, seller says, I had no idea. It was not on the rider. Then they were like, who prepared the rider? Then they wanted to point fingers at the buyer's agent because they prepared it. And it's like, well, I copied the information from the MLS. Well, everyone knows the information on the MLS is not warranted. Regardless of the fact, the seller still had to review and sign it. And if they knew something was off, they should have countered that information so that everybody knew exactly what needed to happen. So it became a who was what, where and why, and who was responsible for this situation. Unfortunately, we are not attorneys. We are not judges. We cannot sit there and say, you're in breach, you're this, you're that. We have no idea what a judge would rule in this situation. We can only say what the contract says. The contract says that you are to disclose X, Y, and Z. If you did not disclose it, then you're responsible for the fee. That's what the contract says. If you think different or you want a judge to say otherwise, get your own opinion from an attorney or a judge. This is what it says, right? This is the way we stay in our lane. We just tell them what's on the contract and they make their own deduction. If they're still not coming to reasoning, then of course, now we're going to have to get attorneys involved and all this, especially if the buyer still wants to purchase the property. Because at the end of the day, they can stand on their rights and say, hey, this is what the writer says. This is what we agreed. This is what you have to do. That was the situation. It was about $60,000 in assessments that had to be paid. At the end of the day, the seller was upside down in order to close this unit. They had no money to give. So in order to sell this property, they had to come with an additional $20,000 out of their own money, pulled from God knows where, in order to close. Now, one of the things that an attorney had explained to me, the moment the seller has signed a contract, they've already conveyed their equitable rights to the property. So the buyer had every right to enforce the sale because they performed, they did their applications, they did their loans, everything was good to go. Am I unfrozen?
No, you're good.
I'm good? All right.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So because of this one little caveat in the rider, it goes away to attorneys. And then the attorney.
Now you're cutting out and we're not seeing you. At least not on my end.
Me neither as well.
Yeah, no, she's frozen.
Yeah, she's frozen right now.
Hold on, did she freeze again?
It seems like she is not even here. Yeah, I think
Yeah, let's wait a little bit. I think she will be back.
All right, there we
There
go.
it is.
I'm back.
Yeah, they're back.
All right, perfect. We'll edit that in post. So what ends up happening is that when we get these situations where now attorneys need to get involved and rational minds don't prevail, that is exactly what's going to happen. Could this be avoided? Yes. How could it have been avoided? Knowing with your meeting minutes what's going on. So what I tell all of the listing agents is let's go ahead and request meeting minutes. Let's get this condo writer taken care of and signed by the seller so that everybody has all this information up front. If there is anything that we're seeing that is coming down the pipeline, because these meetings, these special assessments don't happen in one meeting, vote, and everybody move forward. There are multiple conversations that are happening before they're established. So because of that, the best thing to do is let's go ahead, view all of the information that we have at hand with this association, get that formalized so that everybody knows what they're walking into. Clarity is kindness. for my buyer's agents, if you're walking into a transaction when the condominium rider has not been uploaded into the supplement section or completed by the seller, you can do two things. You can update, basically create the condo rider, but leave all information blank and make it part of additional terms and conditions that the seller complete the condominium rider, and the buyer at this point will be executing a completed condominium rider. That way the seller has the time at that point to review, update the field, and let everybody know. One of the things that could also happen with a condominium is first right of refusal. First right of refusal is a term that says that in that association, if a unit is going to go into the market to be sold, the board has a right to review the terms and say, hey, you know what, I want to buy this property. Now, if the seller did not go through the processes of letting the association know, hey, I'm selling this unit, here's my notice, here's what I'm selling it for, and do the processes that are outlined in the association for first right of refusal, two things can happen. One, they reject automatically the application for any buyer. And they're like, nope, we're not going to look at that because you did not initiate the first right of refusal clause in our bylaws. Or two, they're going to say, hey, you know what? We're going to have to go through our processes now. And that takes about X amount of days to do because we need to circulate this throughout the entire association to see if someone wants to buy your unit. To circumvent any of that, definitely listing agents confirm always if first right of refusal is apparent in this condominium. And if it is, start the processes as early as possible. What has happened that I've seen in my desk, I've seen associations go, you know what, I like these terms, I'm going to go ahead and take over this contract. What happens at that point? The buyer who fell in love with this unit now can no longer buy this unit. And now the association is going to pay for it. Don't worry, at the end of the day, if the association decides to take over that contract, buyer's agents are still going to get paid as representing the association on that contract because you were the one that negotiated those terms. However, your buyer now has to pivot to another property. So again, for condominiums, let's get all of that juicy paperwork right up front. I want all documents. I want to confirm first right of refusal is not available here. I want to confirm if there's any special assessments coming down the pipeline, because that is going to make sure that you protect your seller the most from any surprises. If there is a special assessment, then it's opening up dialogue with the association. Is it possible to convey this to the new buyer? Can they take over post-closing? If they say, no, we want all our money if you're conveying the unit, then now you know, hey, everyone, there's X amount of dollars in special assessments. Seller is willing to pay X, buyer has to come with X, or this is not a benefit to the seller anymore and they want the buyer to take over it. And the adjustment is adjusted or amended into the, or baked into the purchase price, right? But now you can navigate with confidence that you know everything that you need to know about this association. Again, their club, their rules, what they say goes, okay? Another best practice when it comes to the condominium is I always suggest to use a line item condo document receipt. The line item condo document receipt is going to tell you, did I receive the articles of incorporation? Did I receive the declaration of condominium? Did I receive the bylaws? Did I receive the rules and regulations? Did I receive the profit and loss? Important. Lenders require a budget. The budget is only for what they're planning to do in the future. The prospective buyer has a right to know what they've spent their money on, what they're doing every day. So that's why they get the updated or the most up-to-date profit and loss with income and balance sheet. That way they know the health of the community that they're walking into. So profit and loss to buyer, budget to any lender that's associated to the transaction. Once you complete a line item condo document receipt, you're going to know that the buyer has all the documents that they are supposed to receive. I know it's common practice to send over an entire package over to the buyer and say, hey, here are the docs, and let them figure it out. One, always forward any document that you receive from the associations. And I have a cautionary tale on this too. A transaction, the seller's agent did exactly that, forwarded every single piece of documentation that they have. The buyer's agent received it, did not deliver the documents over to the buyer. They closed, an assessment was put post-closing on the property. The buyer, well upset, sues the seller. At that point, the agents are in court, the seller's in court, and the title company's in the court because they're like, how did anybody not catch this? Unfortunately, well, fortunately for the seller, they didn't want to do any of this. So they were like, hey, you know what? I'm going to settle with you. But your real issue is not with me, it's with your agent because I gave them all these documents. In discovery, it is discovered that in the chain of record of the agent, they received from the listing agent all of the documents and the meeting minutes where it said that there was a special assessment being placed on the property. The listing agent does not have to delineate to you what's in the documents that they're sending over. The buyer has to confirm that they received everything that they were supposed to receive. And even a little bit of extra is there. It's a little bit of extra. The way to CYA on an association is anything that you receive. Hey, I just received this from the seller. Let's go ahead and review this and see if you have any questions. Just forward it over. Take off any contact information that you don't want them to have, but every attachment should be there. That way, the buyer was provided notice, whether as an adult they made their choice not to read every document that was sent over to them. That's on them. But at least as an agent, you protected yourself and gave them everything that they needed. Okay, for co-ops. Now, seller has to obtain all required documents. Everything except financials. So the same, you're going to have the declaration of the cooperative, you're going to have the bylaws and all this stuff. One thing that I didn't mention before, bylaws have to be federally updated every 30 years. So because, let's say, I'm seeing this a lot now, you get docs and they say 1972. It's been over 30 years, okay? Where's the amendment to the bylaws? Because they have to be amended again as per federal regulation in the county records, and you have to affirm that these docs are the same. So that is one of the things that you also need to look out for. The date of recording, if it's within the 30 years, they should be okay, but always ask for any amendments because they can happen quite often, and the buyer's entitled to receive not only the docs, but any amendments to those docs. But if you see that they're already 1970, we're getting into the 1980 range right now, any of those documents, they need to be updated every 30 years. So you ask for the amendments to the documents as well. Also with co-ops. Co-ops, you ask for all up-to-date documents except the financials, which you do not have a right to. For listing agents, highly recommend getting all screening applications and requirements up front. I have seen the most dooziest of requirements for co-ops. Not incomes having assets worth X. Those types of situations are going to be prevalent in a co-op. So the more you know up front what their processes are, what the turnaround times are, is going to save you and any potential buyers all the heartache. If you say, hey, they're going to take their sweet time and do this within the 45 business day period, if it's in Broward County, fantastic. But here's what you need to know. This is their income, their credit. This is what they require from each and every one of their shareholders, which is what they are, in order to buy into this community. are you going to meet those requirements? Because the co-ops are quick to say, no, thank you, bye. So as long as you meet standard for them, there should not be an issue to process your application. Caveat for international buyers. Always let everyone know in your associations, hey, my buyer is from Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, France. We have a lot of those. Whatever country they're coming from, you need to let them know that there is an international buyer. What this is going to do is it may elongate the process for processing, because now they're going out of standard and needing international documents to be reviewed, translated, and the background checks completed. So as long as you tell them, hey, it's international, what do you need to do? Have that available, ready to go. Especially in our lovely Pompano Beach, Deerfield Beach, Boca Raton, we have a lot of international buyers in those areas. I'd always ask for the 2 applications, not only the standard, but also for international applicants. That way you have them in your supplements ready to go for the buyers. Okay, for homeowners associations, since it's a statutory requirement that the HOA disclosure summary be provided before actually signing an offer, have the summary already filled out by the buyer, the seller. Upload that into your supplements, and then you are golden. There are 2 things that the seller is responsible for an HOA. Have the summary completed, because again, a buyer cannot disclose themselves. And 2, have the screening application, if applicable, completed and uploaded into the supplements. That's going to get you to circumvent a lot of the time frames and shorten them as much as possible. Hey, we already have the supplements, has the attachments for what you need to make your application. We already completed that contingency, mark it 0. That way the buyer can submit as soon as possible. Again, best practice, when you have the approval period in the contract, whether condo or co-op or HOA, make that approval due before on closing date or before. I've had many transactions where buyer receives the approval in the morning and we're closing in the afternoon. That's just going to make sure that, hey, whether it's a condo, it's not going to terminate the contract because it was 5 days before. And now you have to basically make amendments and have everybody agree that it didn't terminate, and we're reestablishing the contract just to have a clean chain of record. If we're moving the closing date, we're moving the approval period. So that way the approval period is that closing date on hand. Because if you're going to have to extend, you're already extending closing date. Make sense? Now, with the homeowners associations, always have screening requirements for any of these property types. I know that co-ops are a doozy, but many of the condominiums are starting to go in that route of having credit, income requirements established for their community. Again, their club, their rules. We even have associations at this time that are even making up rules as they go along, and they haven't even been recorded. So knowing how to ask for the information and say, hey, where is this located in your bylaws? Because that way you can say, okay, this is where it's at. This is what has been agreed upon by this community in order for everyone in that club to feel fine that you're going to be moving in here. Of course, they're not going to have discriminatory practices that are written into their bylaws. Unfortunately, it has become prevalent that many lawyers have had to get involved in associations because outside of what is written in their bylaws, they start making up their own rules, and then it's not in alignment with their rules. And then, of course, at that point, you're going to need an attorney to represent the interest of the customer with the association so that they can come to terms on what is actually written and what they're stating. Currently, we had 3 of those situations last month. Unfortunately, it's just becoming rampant that denials are coming in for things that are not disclosed from the association. The seller does not have a control over the situation. but the association has to provide in writing the reason for any denial and where that is located in their bylaws in order to give that denial teeth. The moment that denial comes through with no stipulations as to where it is located, at that point, the buyer will need their own attorney to address it with the property manager or the association's the reason for. Now, a lot of people shy away from using attorneys because, I mean, I see it every day. People are very superstitious and they're like, it's not meant for me. I'm getting way too much pushback. I don't like it. It's making a happy process not so good. And I can understand that. Something that's supposed to be a joyous experience gets soured by something that's out of everyone's control. We've done everything that we can to get to this point, and now we're dealing with an association or a property management company that may be establishing rules that don't exist. So if that's the case, hey, all of the addendums for the association protect the buyer in case of a denial. You can get out, you can have your money. The property is just not accepting you the way that they have written it, and you're okay. But if you want to live there, here's an attorney that I recommend. Have a conversation. This is all the documents that we have. Unless they provide us something else in writing that has been established by the board as true, this is what we're supposed to be measuring everyone through. Outside of these guidelines, I don't know what that is. And I don't know why they're making their decision. So the most as real estate professionals we can do is just document attempts, document everything that we've done up to that point, because that same chain of record is what's going to be used as discovery for the attorneys that come in and help us get that to close. Do we want to avoid that as much as possible? Yes. But transactions are 85% predictable, and that 15% are the human beings. And in real estate, we have so many human beings in the transaction. We have our lenders, our title partners, the cooperating agents and associations, their transaction coordinators, their processors, so many people to bring this transaction to close. And mitigating all those personalities all at the same time can be quite fun. So knowing that it can be such a fun process dealing with such personalities, we have to account for that there may be someone in the association that may have different views than everyone else. And that different view can create an issue down the line. So knowing that, hey, if the listing agent knows, hey, this property is going to be a little bit difficult. We have an association that is kind of making up their rules as they're going on. I mean, I would love, Mary, are you in here with us?
Yes.
I would love for you to share the story of what's going on with an association that you have right now, because this has been 90 days of love, people.
So I'm currently working through with Phoenix Management. They have, I have a listing in Lauderdale Oaks. And I've had a listing that's been on the market since April. And every time we submit a buyer, we get a different restriction for why that buyer can't buy. So far I've gotten credit history, not a credit minimum, credit history. I'm like, fine, where is it in the bylaws? It's nowhere in the bylaws. Then they denied another buyer because she's retired and she doesn't have $25,000 minimum in financing. And I was like, okay, fine. Where is it written again? So this has been an ongoing, there's attorneys involved, like the last buyer, he got denied for credit history. And then when pressed, it was because he missed one payment on a card and it showed that he was irresponsible, and he was coming in with $300,000 from a sale. So I'm at my wit's end with this whole thing, but the current buyer is determined to buy, and she's, every hurdle that they're throwing at her, she's giving them stuff to be like, okay, now it's fixed, now what? So we'll see if this closes.
So in that situation, I always say faces we see, hearts we don't know. In that particular transaction, that unit, the president of the board lives next door and he wants the unit. Point and simple. He wants the unit. He wants to make his unit bigger and he's going to throw every hurdle. Now that attorneys got involved and they're pressing the issue, we may see some different results from the situation. But that is what could potentially happen in any of your transactions. You don't know when you're dealing with so many people what their intentions are. There has been discrimination in other cases that I've seen, and that itself, that's an attorney situation. We can only say, hey, this is what the bylaws say. This is what the contract says. This is what everything that we are facilitating this transaction with states. Outside of that, if humans are being human, we're going to have to bring you the biggest human we can find to deal with this situation because we can't address it anymore, right? And sometimes that just may be the case. So for best practices, condos, co-ops, or HOAs, the most information that you have at hand, the better for anyone. And if you are in the buyer side of the transaction, always talk to your listing agent. Everyone's here to get this to close. Hey, let's get everything this set up for success for our buyer to seller to sell and buy. Let's have all this information up front, whether we're financing or not, so that we can have the most clear path. If we know that it's 45 business days, let's make this 45 business days on the closing date. You have control over that. If you know that the association has a first right of refusal and it's already been done, document as such, hey, it's already been done and we don't have to worry about it. Or the process is X. They need to review it from point of contract and they'll receive a response for X. Fill that section accordingly. The more clarity that comes around, buyers and sellers don't do this every day, but we do. We can set that bar, that standard, that it's clear across the board for them. Hey, these are the people that are mitigating these processes. This is what they've said, and we've baked that into the contract. So it's smooth all the way through. That is what you can control. And that is only going to be gotten from communication. Point blank, period. There's no other way of doing it. We need to communicate with one another to make these things happen. That way, everyone is on the same page and we're coming in clean. And everybody's like, okay, this is what we're dealing with. We're going to deal with it. We're going to get to closing and we're going to close it in success and excellence with 5-star reviews all the way around because we managed this project well. All right, everyone. So now, many of you are on your phone, but I am going to be sending post-class the link so that you can rate me to get a copy of the cheat sheet in your phone. But this particular cheat sheet is right full of information, which I'm going to go ahead and start opening that. Oops. As it's loading. All right. So when you get access to the cheat sheet, which I'll share when we get to the wrap up of this class, there's a few links that I find incredibly important for all of our agents to know. One is Florida Realtor Legal Hotline. They are there to answer all contractual questions. You tell them, hey, this is where it says on this writer. What can you tell me how I can navigate this piece? Because this is the situation that we're running into. And they'll provide you all the guidance that you need to navigate that situation, at least from a legal standpoint. No, you cannot share that information with your customers, but at least you are prepared. In that instance, that it is that 15 lovely percent that we're always talking about that we just can't control. Or at least it'll help you reframe the words that you're saying to your customer. Maybe that'll help them gain the clarity that they need. You'll find a link to the presentation so that you can go back and look at it at your leisure. You'll also see that we have linked all 3 statutes, and these are PDFs. So if there's something that you want to see regarding what the statute says about amendments, what it says about frequently asked questions, what it says about anything, you can Control F those PDFs and find where it's located, so that if you have to give your association facts, you just say, hey, as per chapter 719.230, it says that you have to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. Please let me know when this is going to get done. In the municipal codes, I have linked Miami-Dade and Broward County, and those are the association municipal codes. They're being constantly updated. As of last month, they passed another ordinance in Miami-Dade County that all associations within the county need to be put on a website with all of their documents, amendments, financials readily available. If this is a success, I hope that it goes across the entire state, because this is going to limit a whole bunch of back and forth with the associations. It's like, hey, you have to upload them anyway. Let's go grab them documents. All right, we have some contract writers and useful forms. You're going to see the condominium writer, which we've highlighted with notes. Again, I preface, these are our TC notes. They are not legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. But when we see associations, these are the notes that we are referencing throughout the transaction to know what we need to do in every case instance. Now, we touched lightly on frequently asked questions, but I want to go a little bit further on it right now. Frequently asked questions, as per DBPR, which regulates the associations, have to be updated annually. So when you receive FAQs from the association, they have to be dated within a year of you actually signing that contract. If they're not within the year, then the association needs to update that FAQs because it's out of, it's expired and it's not in compliance with DBPR. Some instances that I have seen, one, the association goes as far and says, oh, we don't have any, or you have to purchase that. One, you're required by Florida statute to have frequently asked questions. And at minimum, you have to answer the 5 questions that the DBPR lined out in these forms. These forms are there. They're also available in all of your form repositories, whether it's Form Simplicity, Dotloop, Transaction Desk, DocuSign, wherever you hold your forms, you can always find the DBPR form. That way you can say, hey, if you don't have it established, here is the DBPR form so that you can fill out and at least provide the minimum to be in compliance with state requirements. I have also hyperlinked the line item condo document receipt. I love this form. It keeps us all on the same page on what is required. Whether it's a condo or a co-op, you're going to see what is required and what needs to be passed over and the date that it was actually received. That way your buyer can say, hey, yep, I received all those documents. I'm going to go ahead and sign this receipt. If we use the regular condominium writer, it just gives us the requirement that the governance form was given, which is required to, and I did put that in here for you, and that all docs were given. Now, we can't confirm that all docs were actually provided, but that at least gives us line by line what we need to look out for and that we received it. The notice to association is a FAR form that came in 2002. And what that document does is give the listing agent, it's a authorization form, which I'm going to show it to you right now. I mean, it's been a while, but there it is. The seller fills in the top portion, and that's telling the association and the management company, hey, I have hired a realtor. I want you to speak with that realtor and give them everything that they ask for. This is their authorization to the association to speak with you. They've signed it, they've dated it, and it's in written, and you just send that over to them and say, hey, I'm authorized to ask all the questions that I need to do in order to get my listing prepared. It also has a section of asking many of the information that we'll need to complete a listing. Now, they may get pushback saying, hey, this information is provided in our lender questionnaire. One, this is not for the lender, this is for the listing. Two, this document is all the information the seller has a right to receive. When the seller provides a request as per Florida statute, you are supposed to fulfill that request. Please fill out the document and send it back to me. Now, some fun stuff. Florida Realtors always sends out a lot of cool infographics that they put on their website. And I have linked a lot of the ones that are associated with associations on this form. And we're constantly updating this document. So I highly recommend that when you receive this link, save it in your bookmarks bar. I've had agents save it to their actual, what's the word that I'm looking for? Their home screen on their phones, because they go in there, grab the document that they read, and then they look through it. This will help you in finding anything that you need when it comes to associations. The great one is 20 questions to ask when buying a condo. It's an infographic. Download it, give it to your buyers, because that is the questions that they should be asking when it comes to associations. We also have listings with a property association. They created an infographic with that. Grandfathered rental rules, which we're having a rampant change of those because of the uptick in Airbnbs, VRBOs in our community. So it tried to address that issue when they start changing the rental guidelines for a community. And my most favorite one that I had to download immediately and make a copy, so that will always be there. Florida condo laws, required documents, and canceling a transaction. I send this over to listing agents like this so that they know, hey, this is what Florida Realtors said, just so that you are on the same page with me and why the reason I'm asking for all these documents. It is a reference tool that you can use at any time, and it will help you tremendously because there's a lot of misinformation. Not all agents are the same. And I go into the assumption that, hey, let's educate, and so that all of us can be empowered together to move this along, because everybody just wants to get this to close. We don't want to get something stuck. So why I'm saying it's the seller's responsibility, it says it here. Why am I saying that I need these documents? Here's the reference why. It's a nice little sheet for them to say, oh, I get it now, and let's get this done. So for condos, I have linked the governance form. Every transaction has to have a copy of the governance form, which is Florida's information sheet for the buyers, letting them know how condominium associations are actually put together and what rights they have under Florida law. Then they have the condo owner's rights and responsibilities. These are all by lawmakers. They created these documents and they're available for download. The same with the co-ops. It talks about their owners' rights and responsibilities and the summary of changes for that document. Now, these are some fun stuff that we put together, which is our scripts and templates. And that has starter questions for the association. It's a Google Doc. As we're getting new questions, we're updating that document so that you can ask these questions when you're calling an association. If your seller does not want to complete the notice to association, we also provided an email script that you can tell your seller, hey, copy paste this and send it to your property manager. And at least they have it in writing that I can get all the information that I need. And then we also hyperlink the best additional terms and conditions for association, how to request for meeting minutes, how to request for any particular document, especially when you're in an HOA. Documents are not required, but that does not mean that it cannot be a point of negotiation if your customer really wants to know what is going on in this association. At the end of the day, it's their club, their rules. The more information the buyer has to be informed, to be happy in making this purchase, the better for everyone all across the board. And then we've also provided a few of our freebies that we're providing this month. We have our fall inspired templates. You are required to have a free Canva account to download them. And we're also having a promo to complete the fall set, so you can get them for 70% off. And we're still having our all doc subscription, which is the drafting of your offers, your buyer agreements, your listing agreements, your contract to lease, and your lease agreements professionally drafted by our team. And it's off for the first 3 months. If you want to learn more about our services as transaction coordinators, we're more than welcome to book a time with me. My link is there. And that way we can have a chat about how we can help you grow and move your business forward. I highly encourage everyone to follow us on social media. We're constantly updated, providing tips and tricks and alerts when things are changing in the marketplace, especially when it comes to documents. That way, if you don't see it first, you'll probably see it on our feed, because we like to keep our hands on the pulse of what is affecting the community. Oh my God. All right. So I want to open the floor up to questions that you have, situations that maybe we can help you with, that you've walked into together. The Hive Mind can help you in addressing anything that have come up to you in your transactions. Feel free to unmute yourselves. Don't everybody talk at once.
I do have one. Sometimes agents or even listing agents confuse HOA, not documents, but the HOA summary with the condo writers, and the property is a condo, and they, like, I just had one that they have selected both check boxes, HOA and condo writer, and the property is a condo.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, let's just process this, and people don't really know, like, they're even on the other side, and you sent like, okay, this, what are your thoughts on this, like, what versus HOA summary and condo, and they just respond like, oh yeah, it's there, and I'm like, okay, well.
I love this question because it a lot of the things that we handle here is housekeeping items, right? So we have the parties have executed the wrong form, right? The legal description will let you know the governing type if you're not going to go all the way into the warranty deed. So the legal description will tell you if it is a PUD, if it has lot and block, if it's a condo, if it's a cooperative. It is written into the legal description. So at least when you're porting over data from the MLS to create your list of your offer, the legal description will tell you, oh, I see condominium unit and all these words and letters that never make any sense, but that's just for the state, right? This is how they've identified it. But they put it in the legal description to be the key for everyone to know, oh, this is governed as a condominium. When you see lot and block, and then you know that is parcel owner. You own the lot and the block. Therefore, if it's an association, it's most likely a homeowners association. And if you have a co-op, well, it will say co-op in the legal description. So education is key. It's saying, hey, the legal description says X. Go a step further and say the warranty deed says that it is governed as X. We will need to be basically transferring all these agreements into this new writer. And then that way we're all on the same page of the governing type, because if it's being financed, the lender most likely will ask for the updated document anyway when it goes through underwriting. Title is going to go through title, and they're going to say, hey, this is governed as a condominium, and it doesn't have the stipulations that are required by statute for a condominium or a co-op and interchangeably a homeowners association. So your legal description and your warranty deed are your best bet as amazing professionals to get the right type of property. I know that sometimes the other side, it could be the listing agent, didn't know how to input it into the MLS. Again, the information on the MLS is not warranted. So sometimes we just have to do a little due diligence on our end to confirm, is this a condominium, or is this an HOA, or is this a co-op? And then that way you can navigate it comfortably. I always suggest, if you're on the buyer side, do not complete the summary, do not complete the riders, just attach it, put everybody's name, and then make it a term of the contract that the seller has to complete it. That way it was their hand that completed that document and provided everything that needed to happen. That way, you know, if something should happen, I've gone through it so many times, especially when it comes to fees, is $30 more or $40 more. We didn't know because, hey, it goes out of my account, or worse, it was the wrong information on the MLS. Now everybody needs to come together to make that adjustment for that fee that is extra. I mean, I've seen as high as someone paying 5 years of that extra fee right at closing, just so that to get the transaction through. So I recommend, even though you put it as an attachment and you fill the recitals, which is the first part, name of buyer, name of seller, and the address, that the seller complete that document so that everybody is on the same page. And then that way the buyer will execute that form. But when it comes to that, all you do is a housekeeping when you're processing a transaction right there. This is what it says in public record, what this property is. We're going to have to interchange these documents because the parties did execute a document. It may be the wrong one, but it's still a document. And it was an attachment to the contract.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else have any questions that I can address?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yolene, what's up?
How you doing? Thank you
I'm
so
good.
much for putting this together.
You're welcome.
I just sent over a contract to you guys, which I have question about. First off, the agent kind of make me feel that there is something wrong because she removed the assessment where I put seller will, it does an assessment on the condo rider that the seller will be responsible for it. So she removed that and have the buyer. And then on part of that rider, she put something additionally. Then I asked her, is there an assessment? Oh, I don't know. I'm not, if there is, we are not aware of it. Then why would you go to the extra step to be writing things on the rider and then also removing where the seller will be responsible to pay for the assessment at closing and then switch it to the buyer? So this morning I called the association, and what they explained to me, they would know. We have to request the estoppel. So it just makes me feel not easy. It's just like they have something that they hide it.
Right. Especially when, like I said, faces we see, hearts we don't know. The great thing is that there are terms in the contract that still protect the buyer. Okay. Even if they say that buyer shall pay assessments due after closing, if they did not
Disclose.
A1 disclose what assessments are coming up, thank you so much. They did not disclose what was coming up or is established in the association. The C2 says right after that, if sellers check, sellers shall pay the assessments full prior to or at time of closing. If C3, if special assessments levied or pending exist as of the effective date and have not been disclosed above by seller, then seller shall pay such assessments in full at the time of closing. So if they do not disclose in C1, then C3 makes them fully responsible for any assessments that are levied. Now, I just went through this situation where the $60,000 assessment, seller didn't want to pay, seller didn't want to disclose.
Mhm.
Now, if reasonable minds will not prevail, then at that point, if buyer still wants unit, buyer will need to take seller to court to enforce his rights under these provisions.
Okay. Now,
So what can you do to mitigate that? You said it's a homeowners association, correct?
No, it's
No,
a condo.
it's a
It's a
condo
condo.
association.
Okay, perfect. This is a condo. So if it's because it's a condo, I would recommend asking for the meeting minutes because the buyer has the right to request for documents. Make that one of the requirements that the seller provide the meeting minutes. That way you can do your own due diligence throughout the inspection period to confirm if there are any special assessments. Also, you can call the association and hopefully they'll also provide that information. Will they? It's a 50-50 toss-up because when you're on the buyer side, you're not a member of the association.
Mhm.
And that information is only privy to the members. So if seller will work hand in hand to provide that guidance or that clarity, it's awesome. If not, it may be a little push waiting for the estoppel, but once the estoppel comes out, we'll know at that point that if there is any assessments or special assessments that have been levied, and then you can dictate who is going to be responsible for what at that point. I hope that brings the clarity that you needed on that point.
It does. And another thing, I think you went over the bylaws. Before I go there, let me ask this question. Is it better as the buyer, if I represent the buyer, not to fill out, not to send over the condo writer and request it from the listing agent?
Yes. The
Okay.
most that you could do is mark it as a part of the transaction. So make writer A part of the transaction. Complete the recitals, which is seller name, buyer name, and property address.
Mhm.
Do not sign.
Oh,
And then make it part of the additional terms and conditions that the seller will complete the condominium writer,
Mhm.
and then the buyer will review and execute. What I would say is that those that could be selections for the buyer have that built in. If special assessments, if you know the buyer wants the seller to take care of it, put that in there. Because of
Okay.
course, if they left blank, it's to the buyer. And if you want the seller to take care of anything, you put it there. That way, if there is a declaration on C1 of special assessments, the buyer can make an informed choice whether they want to move forward or not. Because the buyer at that point has to make that decision, right?
Yeah.
But
Now,
that way it's not executed. If this writer is not executed with the contract package, then the contract is not executed. So you made it a part of the contract for it to be completed.
okay. Now, as far as the bylaw, is that supposed to be part of upload to the MLS? I think I've heard you say something like that. Which, for example, I requested the bylaw from the agent last night, and she said, yeah, I have those things. I was supposed to have it as part of attachment on the MLS. I never did. And I reminded her, even before I sent everything to her this morning, to please have those things there so I can provide it to the buyer. Still, nothing is on there. And she has not even emailed that to me.
So again, adults can do whatever they want, right?
Yeah.
The great thing about the writer is as long as you check 5B, the non-developer disclosure, because everyone is a non-developer. We're not developing this. This is literally a resale.
Mhm.
So 5B is checked. It says the agreement is voidable by buyer by delivering written notice of the buyer's intention to cancel within 3 days, excluding any holidays and weekends, if they don't receive docs.
Okay.
And those docs are clearly outlined that it's the declaration of condominium, articles of incorporation, bylaws, rules and regs, and the year-end financial. Not the budget, year-end financial, the profit and loss, and frequently asked questions and answers. If those those 5 or 6 documents are not received, the buyer has the right to cancel. Once the buyer receives all those documents, it could be one day before closing that we get absolutely every document that was provided to us. Buyer still has 3 days, 3 business days to review each and every one of those documents and say, or, oh, I didn't know that, and no, I'm not moving forward. The buyer has every instance to cancel until that loop is closed. So once we send over the request and say, hey, these are the documents that we're asking for, please provide it to the buyer. Seller is responsible at seller's expense, which is right here in item 6. It's referencing the statute. It says buyer request. This is an unvoidable right. No one can waive this. The moment the buyer requests it in this writer or in writing in an email, buyer requests these documents, seller has to provide the requested documents because they are the member of the association. And as members, they have full rights to these documents. So the moment that they tell their association, hey, I need X, Y, and Z, they have to provide that over to the seller. Then at that point, definitely, I would always suggest instead of signing standard 7 on the writer, to actually complete the line item condo document receipt so that you can sign off when you got each document. And that way you have the most up to date. One of the references from earlier, all bylaws have to be re-amended every 30 years. It's not statutory. It's not municipal. It's federal. So federally, they have to amend their bylaws every 30 years. So if you're seeing an association from 1970, 80, is the 90s already 30 years? I keep forgetting.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, that's great. 1990. Yeah. So for all the way into the 90s right now, those have to be automatically amended and updated into the county records. So all amendments, all of the documents that have originally been recorded, as well as the most current rules and regulations, and the frequently asked questions have to be dated within 1 year of the contract. And if the association says, well, we're going to charge money for it, unfortunately, it is a seller's expense to pay for them, even though they're not supposed to, because they are members of this association and pay their dues accordingly. Does that answer the question?
Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
You're welcome. All right, guys. Well, we have just 2 more minutes. Robin, do you have a question? I saw you unmuted yourself.
I do, Michelle. My question is regarding co-ops and financials. So at what point is a buyer allowed to request the financials for a co-op?
So for a co-op, it's when they're a full member. When they are moved in and all that good stuff, that's when they have a right to the health of the actual company.
Wow.
Yeah, they did not make that part of literally, it says no right to financials. So all co-ops stand on that. You don't have a right to our financials, but we'll let you know how we run this.
Regarding the condos, most associations won't provide those. So it's up to the seller to provide them to us as the listing agent.
Correct. If you get the notice to association or the seller provides written notice to the association, hey, I need you to give all that you would give to me to my agent. They're supposed to follow what their member is saying because they provided authorization in writing. If they say, well, we don't need it in that form, we need it on this other form, well, then now their club, their rules. Fill out that form and give them the notice so that they can talk to you directly. So in our cheat sheet, which I'll be sending out to everyone, it's going to have there a nice little email template that you can use, or you can complete the NTA, which is in your form library. And that will give you the authorization you need to get what you need from the association. Because they don't do this every day, but we do, and we can ask them for everything that we are possibly going to need to make this a smooth process.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, guys, I want to thank you so much for
Wait, hold on, I'm sorry. I wanted to mention one more thing because I don't know if I heard it. You did mention that the co-op goes on its own addendum, right? It's
Correct.
not- Yeah, okay.
It's not condo, it's not writer A, it's not writer B. It is co-op addendum, and it is searchable in your form library on any